The white balance setting on your camera allows you to compensate for changing light conditions. Now, you may not think about this that often because as we walk around in the world, our eyes and our brain do a great job of adjusting from indoor light to outdoor light to fluorescent tubes to tungsten lighting, which is, of course, those little screw light bulbs that we've used for years. Tungsten lighting is much different than what we see outdoors because those bulbs emit kind of a reddish-orange light, and outdoors it's kind of bluish. We don't even think about that because our eyes are compensating all the time. Now, the camera tries to compensate by using auto white balance. And basically, that's human mode in a sense, in that the camera's reading the light and trying to adjust accordingly so that we get a natural-looking photo. The problem is the camera's brains aren't quite as good as our brains, and so sometimes we need to give it a little bit of help. And that's what the auto white balance menu is all about, giving your camera a little bit of help so it can produce a natural-looking shot. Auto white balance is the default mode, and that's where we're set to right here. And most of the time it does a pretty good job. But let's say that we go outside on a bright sunny day. Daylight white balance is very interesting. You think, well, aren't cameras sort of balanced for daylight anyway? Well, they are, but there's a wide spectrum of difference in daylight. Daylight can be all the way from, let's say, 5,000 Kelvin to 9,000 Kelvin. Well, that's a lot of difference. Daylight really strikes at the heart of what you see when you're out in bright sunny light. That temperature is different than, let's say, when there's a little cloud cover coming in. So the daylight white balance setting is something worth looking at. A lot of times auto white balance will cover this setting just fine, but if you don't quite like the way the image looks on the viewfinder, if the color isn't quite right, and you're out in broad daylight, take a look at the daylight setting. It can be very helpful and sometimes give you just that little extra oomph that you're looking for. Cloudy is like a warming filter, and if you ever shot traditional film photography where you had to put a filter in front of the lens to compensate for changing light, you'll recognize cloudy as a warming filter. And what it does is it adds a little yellow, a little orange to the scene. What happens is when clouds come overhead, or if you're shooting in open shade, the light actually gets a little bluish. And it's not very flattering, especially for portraits. Skin tones can look just a little clammy. So what the cloudy white balance setting does, it warms it up a little bit, gives it a little bit more yellow, a little bit more orange, and sort of brings things back to life. So whenever you're shooting in shade, overcast skies, even if you're shooting indoors next to an open window, you might want to look at the cloudy setting if your pictures are looking a little cool and clammy. Now, on the other hand, this is your choice. You may decide that you like that very warm, glowy light. Maybe it feels homey or like a cozy kind of feeling. But if you want the skin tones not to be quite so red, not so orange, then try tungsten white balance setting. You usually have two settings for fluorescent tubes, and that's because fluorescent tubes are not consistent. There are different types. There are cool white, there are natural, so-called natural balanced tubes, and there are others also. So you have two to choose from, and you notice as I switch from the regular to the H that there are different effects on the picture. The H version is a little bit warmer, and the standard one is a little bit cooler. So what you have to do is switch to the fluorescent tube setting that you think is going to work best. Take a picture, look at it. If it's not quite right, try the other one. Now I will warn you, fluorescent tubes are the hardest to get good white balance. So even if you try either of these custom settings, you still may not get exactly what you want. There's also a flash white balance setting. This is very interesting because flashes tend to be sort of cool, sort of bluish. And what are we using flashes for? We're using flashes to take pictures of people. So first we nuke them, right? We overexpose them, and then we make them cool and clammy looking. It's not a great look. So this white balance setting helps us offset that by warming up those tones a little bit. It's very similar to cloudy white balance setting, possibly a little bit stronger depending on the camera that you have. If you have a camera that can go underwater, and I don't mean by dunking it in the water by itself, usually it has to go in a housing. Please check your owner's manual to make sure. But if you have a housing for your camera, chances are you will have an underwater white balance setting. And when you're snorkeling around, let's say in the first 10 feet of water, that can be very bluish, again, sort of look to your pictures, and you'll lose some of the color in the coral and the fish. The underwater white balance setting will help restore some of that natural looking color. I have not one, but I have two custom white balance settings here. And these are very interesting. I like these a lot, by the way. I'll tell you that right now. Because sometimes the other presets, they come close, but they're not quite right. This allows you to actually measure the light in the room, and then the camera creates a custom white balance profile for it. Now we can try this right now. What you do is you take a sheet of white paper and you hold it so that it reflects the light in the room. And then you read the on-screen prompt. In this case, it tells me to press the display button. I'm going to do that. Did you notice it took a reading off the white sheet of paper and it went from kind of a icky sort of brownish, creamy sort of color to now a very neutral color? I have now set a custom white balance setting for the lighting in this room. And everything should look fairly natural from this point forward. The only tricky thing about custom white balance is to remember to take your camera off custom white balance when you leave that lighting situation. Because if I were to go back outside now and take pictures with this setting, things would look a little screwy. So instead, once I finish with this shoot, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to auto white balance. This is where the camera can handle most lighting situations, knowing that if I come in contact with an unusual lighting situation, cloudy, tungsten, or something that I just really can't find a preset for, that I have these controls in my white balance menu.